Good morning. Also in the third name of the Institute of Culture and Memory Studies here from ZRC SAZU. Thank you very much, Martin and colleagues, to have initiated this conference. My name is Katja Kobalt, and I'm going to moderate the first panel. I will never talk about war again. No, I will never talk about war again. These are the words from video work by Lana Čmajčanin and Adela Jušić. And many of the colleagues at the panel that will follow, as Adela and Lana, in the last 30 years, really actively not only addressed among one of the first next to feminists and peace workers, but it was art that addressed the urgency to talk beyond war, to imagine, as Tanya said, beyond violence and for life. The contributions that will follow tackle basically in a loop with knowing and of all the legacy that we, especially in the post-Yugoslav space, also have ethical legacy to address today the urgent questions about what kind of society, what kind of planet and planetary belonging we want to imagine and we want to live. Zdenka Badovinac, a long-term curator of Moderna Galleria, afterwards and director, afterwards director of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Zagreb. And she will report to us on peace as a space for the third. Zdenka, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here with you at such a moment. So I would like, it's there already. Okay, so my question is, what would be the most appropriate image of peace for today? Throughout history, images of peace have most often celebrated rulers who finally brought peace after long wars. One of the earliest monuments in this sense is the Ara Pacis, dedicated to Emperor Augustus, who established the Pax Romana. In the 14th century, the Progressive Republic of Siena commissioned Ambrogio Lorenzetti to paint an allegory of good and bad government, which promoted the good government, of course, peace as a consequence of good government. The socialist authorities of Yugoslavia commissioned the construction of many partisan monuments which communicated the idea of peace as linked above all to the victory over fascism. Peace also became one of the main symbols and values of the non-aligned movement. Peace is often depicted as the result of victory over evil, good governance, and wise agreements between heads of the states. Traditional symbols of peace have become instruments of various ideologies or souvenirs, consumer goods. This is what happened to the dough with the olive branch, which Pablo Picasso made famous after the Second World War. In the 1960s, counterculture movements adopted Gerald Holton's symbol of nuclear disarmament. At that time, hippies also used flowers, slogans as make love, not war, etc., to communicate their anti-militarist views. Although often described as naive, the expression of their peace-loving sentiments, was nevertheless produced in a strong climate of social criticism, student protests, and anti-Vietnam War demonstrations around the world. Consider, for example, the 1967 drawings of Marko Pogacnik, one of the key figures of Grupo Ho, as you know, whose powerful message is based on the combination of witty depictions of flowers, scissors, combs, and other innocent objects with the brief comments on the ease with which young boys are sent to their deaths, as in the case of, for example, this drawing where the text says, "We'll put you on Planika," and Planika is the Slovene shoes factory. "We will clean you, we will arm you, we will kill you, Vietnam." Some of Pogacnik's drawings allude to propaganda advertisements conveying the message that capital was also behind the war in Vietnam. Like the grid drawing, as you can see, with text, "Vietnam brings new windows to your home." In this message, we are not so far from the emancipatory propaganda posters of Vladimir Mayakovsky, whose satirical agitprop posters were mainly aimed at informing the country's largely illiterate population about current events. One of his posters, as you can see, showing a Russian and Ukrainian soldier facing each other and with their rifles pointed at the fat capitalists who could inspire us to rethink the concept of peace as a victory over a common enemy. This poster, created in 1920, that is during the Soviet-Polish War, reads, "Ukrainians and Russians have a common war cry. Pan," which means sir, "will not be a master of the worker." The concept of victory over capitalism as the common enemy of all nations was later superseded by the political doctrine of Ruski Mir, which, like similar doctrines such as Pax Romana, Pax Americana, and the like, is largely linked to the cultural and political influence of the superpowers. The poster from the 1980s, which visually quotes the Mir space station with the dough of peace, is far cry from the emancipatory nature of the early Soviet avant-garde posters and shows how peace is linked to the territorial expansion. It is worth noting that Mir in Russian means peace, the world, and also the world. The idea of Ruski Mir has been taken by Vladimir Putin and is linked to the reoccupation of Soviet territory and also to the war in Ukraine. In political terms, peace is essentially the result of peace agreements, the negotiation of the division of the world. One of the images that symbolizes peace in this sense is certainly the group portrait of the leaders of anti-Nazi coalition, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill, discussing the post-war world order at Yalta in February 1945. The Second World War was a war in which, as Gérard Vajma writes in his book, The Object of the Century, the perfect crime was invented. The crime that leaves no evidence, no ruins to bind our memories. And so, for an age that invented the kind of the perfect destruction that Auschwitz represents, we need to conceive of a different kind of object. Vajma sees one of such objects in Malevich Black Square, painted in 1915 during the First World War, which would claim between 15 and 22 million lives. It is a picture of emptiness, of enormous absence that is impossible to interpret. According to Vajma, this abstract image has freed itself from reality, but it points to the real as that which can neither be represented nor articulated, but which can be touched through art. The real might also be sought in the Paysage de la Mort, Syria, by Croatian artist Dimitrije Basičević Mangelos. During the Second World War, when a relative or friend died, Mangelos began to mark the death by painting strokes in his notebooks, erasing what was underneath. In this way, he made the sign of the grave. Later, these graves were enlarged to a quarter, then a half, and then a full page. These black surfaces, sometimes accompanied by thin red lines, letters, or inscriptions, mark the erasure of memory, which becomes a void, a nihil, like that beginning of something new. In Mangelos, it is above all a thought that can lead to inner peace. The idea of suffering that cannot be represented is also present in the proposal by Oskar Hansen and his Polish team for a memorial to the victims of fascism in Auschwitz-Birkenau, which they submitted to the international competition in 1958. The Hansen's team proposal treated the entire site as a memorial. The proposal included only an asphalt road through the camp, leaving the grass and weeds to slowly overgrow the decaying camp buildings, marking the time that has passed since the tragic events. The proposal was also open to individual acts of remembrance by people who could place stones related to Jewish tradition or other objects to remembrance on the road. All the actors, dead and alive, are present here and left to their own time, some in memory, others in real time. Hansen's proposal was, of course, too radical to be accepted, least of all by the survivors of the concentration camp. But it is certainly a concept that could be also interpreted as an image of peace that comes after annihilation and that can no longer be the result of negotiations between people alone, but also increasingly necessarily with nature. The image of emptiness is the image of all those who are absent, but at the same time, through their very absence, are very present. Emptiness makes absence present, and thus, in a sense, makes peace between these two states. But emptiness is not something that guarantees peace in itself. The conditions must be created for the emptiness to be inhabited by hitherto uninvited guests. Like Hansen's proposal, emptiness is also the subject of Ground Zero, the National September 11 Memorial. Here too, the emptiness of two twin towers' footprints is juxtaposed with nature. A forest of equally tall trees symbolizing life and rebirth. The designers intended these forests for pilgrims as well as for the sandwiches of workers from the surrounding offices. The memorial is kind of centerpiece of a new World Trade Center, which according to Daniel Libeskind's master plan will be surrounded by 7 towers dedicated to the world trade, symbolizing the indestructible power of American politics and economies. In such a void, there is surely no room left for the other and the different. We can only guess what aesthetic solution, if any, will commemorate those who died in the crater in the void created by Israeli bombardment in Gaza? What image of peace will accompany the end of this tragedy? Is peace even possible after genocide? In a recent interview, Lana Bastasic, a Bosnian writer living in Germany, linked her experience of Bosnian war to the current siege of Gaza. She herself does not believe that peace is possible after ethnic cleansing. I quote, "Bosnia is still deeply divided. People can't agree on what to call the language they speak. War criminals are penetrated on all sides. Bosnians' brain drain grows every day. Traumatized children have become traumatized adults, unable to find work or access decent health care. Anyone in Germany today who supports the Palestinians who are not suffering a fate in Gaza, who are now suffering the fate in Gaza similar to that of the Muslims in Srebrenica, is today in danger. And as Bastasic says of being branded as anti-Semite. Many cultural events linked to Palestinian artists have been cancelled or postponed in Germany since 7 October. Yet while artists and writers are cancelled for their alleged anti-Semitism, real, and this is Bastasic, real neo-Nazism is on the rise, with the far-right party AfD, Alternative for Germany, winning local elections and mainstream politicians floating the idea of doing deals with them. The far right in Germany has also usurped the dove of symbol of peace and thus advocates peace between Russia and Ukraine in the service of pro-Putin politics. How can peace be regained? How can peace regain its value in such an atmosphere? It is even possible to have an image that does not run the risk of becoming an instrument of this or that manipulation. One possible answer lies in the performative role of art, which today can serve as a space for various life encounters, and not only between people, but also between species. Like Oscar Hansen, contemporary artists are working on how to give space to wild and uncontrolled nature. The artist Jože Barši suggested that the war between public and private interests that has been raging for more than a decade over the fate of Ljubljana's Plečnik Stadium, built in the 1930s, could be resolved by the third actor. By the time of the battle, the stadium was overgrown with grass. Barši, who sees a particular beauty in this overgrown state, proposes that the owners be allowed to build whatever they want around the stadium, as long as they leave the inside of the stadium wild and overgrown, with only minimal restoration. We have similar situation in the area of one of the former barracks of Yugoslav People's Army, the Ljuboš Herceg's barrack behind Bežigrad in Ljubljana. Part of this land was earmarked for the state administration building, but no building permit was ever issued. This empty land became profitable for those who started digging gravel there. The two craters created as a result of this excavation have been inhabited by artists, architects, biologists, and designers who named themselves a collective crater and have created their own production space where they make paper, objects from invasive and other wild plants, record their sounds, facilitate other interspecies encounters. Peace is not only something that puts an end to the territorial wars, but it is a result of negotiations, concerning different wars that are fundamentally connected. The wars of armies, the invisible wars that are waged between public and private interests, between different histories, different cultures and ideologies. If there is a permanent war or wars, there should be also a permanent peace, a peace that can't be an ideal harmonious state, but a state of constant negotiation that always includes those who are present by their absence. In this sense, peace doesn't come after the atrocities as a state without war, but is part of the same reality defined by permanent destruction. What then is the most appropriate image of this kind of peace, which lives the same life as destruction? Any image of peace can only be an image of war. The same image can serve two completely different purposes, for example, to manipulate and to unmask the same manipulation. We live in an age of surveillance which is largely served by bird's-eye images, but not from the perspective of the doe of peace, but from satellites and drones. This is the case of the video by Bosnian artist named Nermin Durakovic, which shows the mountain of Pleševica, where the border between Bosnia and Croatia is located. With the help of European Union funds, Croatia has created a void by cutting down many trees in order to provide an overview over migratory movements. The video was shot from drone, it means with a mechanical eye, and as such could serve as a quasi-objective picture of reality. This image, like no image at all, does not mean much in itself. It is only its users who give it a meaning, some of whom see it as an image of forest in which they can even find peace, others as a situation they have to control. In Durakovic's video, this image is presented as one that serves the European Union authorities as a tool of surveillance, violence, and even killing. No image in itself can depict peace. Peace cannot be depicted. No peace symbol has agitating power in itself. Peace symbols are empty signifiers that can be filled with contradictory contexts and ideologies. Peace is not a standstill. It is a process of making peace, made possible by the voids in the social tissues where wild thought and wild nature can grow. Voids as symbols are only tools. Like, for example, the Square of Republic in the middle of Ljubljana, alternately filled by national celebrations and protests. There was a time between 2020 and 2022 when protesters on bicycle occupied the square to help overthrow the authoritarian government in Slovenia. As Lorenzetti's 14th century fresco teaches us, peace can only come from good governance. So rulers must be constantly pressured and negotiated with. But unlike the small Sienese republic of the 14th century, things are very different today, far from being dependent only on local rulers. The rulers have become much more abstract and distant. So the negotiations have to be much more complex and permanent. A situation of perpetual wars cannot be ended by peace resulting from negotiations between parties driven by similar interests. A planetary interest that goes beyond the interests of capital and various nationalism. It may sound paradoxically, but we need at least one more national state to move in this direction of planetary peace, and that is a Palestinian state. Thank you.